Good evening, everyone. I see still a lot of people are coming in this meeting, but it's 7:02, and an interesting presentation is prepared. So let's start with today's session. And the session will be about blockchain, ERP integration, and ISO standard. Before we start, we have some house rules that we would like to share with you. We will also place them later in the chat. Make sure that you log in with your first and last name to receive the PE points. And also know that the presentation might be recorded. Please mute yourself if you're in the presentation so that we don't have any background noise. And if you have any questions, just type them in the chat or raise your hand. And before I hand over to the presenters, shortly also would like to welcome all the other guests on behalf of the ISACA Square Table Committee. So thanks all for joining. And I will hand over to today's speakers, Koen, Siddharth and Ronald.
Okay, thank you, Manon. Good evening, everyone. Just the first test question, is this visible to everyone? One yes is sufficient.
Yes, it's visible, Ronald.
Okay, sounds good. Yes.
Presentation mode, it would be nice. Thanks.
I thought it was in presentation mode, isn't it?
Now it is in presentation mode.
Yeah. Okay. Tonight we'll discuss blockchain DLT, and besides the two subjects that were already mentioned regarding the ERP blockchain integration and some use cases, we'll also spend time on the ISO standards that are in development and some of the other control frameworks that have already been developed or are currently in progress. The speakers of tonight, just quite briefly, Koen is manager within KPMG Enterprise Solutions, and he has developed the ERP integration, and we'll also show that later this hour. Secondly, Siddharth, our valuable guest from India, who is leading the ISO standardization work on blockchain. And myself, I'm a partner within KPMG and focusing on different subjects, like to spend time on privacy and governance subjects, but also part of the NORIA working group that's currently developing the blockchain control framework. What are we going to cover tonight? And first of all, there's an optional item. Besides the control frameworks and the ERP integration, we would also like to hear, now let's rephrase that, we'd like to see in the chat whether or not there are sufficient people that are interested to spend 5 to 8 minutes on a crash course to bring everyone now approximately to a reasonable level for being able to follow the rest of the discussion, or that will just skip it. So would it be possible to answer yes if you would like to have the crash course, or no if you don't, or leave out the no. And if we are above 30 or 40 with a yes, then we'll spend some time on it. To be quite honest, the public notary had to go to The Hague for some other election in the Tweede Kamer. Has anyone kept track of the number of yeses? Is it sufficient?
There are a lot of yeses.
Okay, then the yes have it. Of the ayes. Koen, would you like to?
Yes, another yes. So short introduction to blockchain and where it came from. And I think, as most of you know, it started with Bitcoin back in 2009 when somebody on the internet basically solved we call it the double spending problem. This is something that is very unique because internet is very good in sharing information. For example, a photo, you can send it to a lot of people, the same photo. But as soon as you started to do that with something of value, for example, money, it becomes a problem because you can send it to one person, and then the idea is that you don't have the money anymore; the other people has it. And that's actually a problem that has been solved by a blockchain, and that's something that has never been done before without a central party. So blockchain does that in a network of people that are unknown to each other, don't trust each other, but are able to actually transfer money from one person to another without the interference of a central party like a bank or a government that actually coordinates this movement. So that's very special, and that's the first actual use case of blockchain, the money, Bitcoin, which has been very successful. And I think, as most of you now know, Bitcoin, I think it's here to stay. I think everybody knows somebody who has owned Bitcoin, who has done something with Bitcoin, and this concept of blockchain, it's very promising. And besides money, we can also do very other things with it, which actually can create a lot of value when transacting information between parties who don't fully trust each other. And blockchain does that by something that's called a consensus mechanism, where everybody in the networks comes to consensus of what has happened, and that is actually posted on the blockchain. And the idea is that you can never change it once it has been posted to the blockchain. So next slide, please, Ronald. Yes. So these are some properties of blockchain, and I think the most important thing is that once it's posted on the blockchain, you cannot change it. That makes it immutable, and it is distributed on a network of parties that do not fully trust each other, and that's a very nice platform of sharing information. But how does this work? And can we please skip to the next slide? Okay, this is a slide basically saying, okay, we have different types of blockchain. We have public blockchains like the Bitcoin, which is it started on the internet. It's basically of the community, and you cannot change it without the approval of the community. And you have private blockchains where you actually keep it in a controlled manner. It's very interesting for companies, but you are using the characteristics like the immutability and the decentralization, so that nobody can change anything on the blockchain without the permission. But you do keep it private. You control the people that are going on or of the blockchain. So next slide. So let's dive a little bit into how this works. So imagine this network of computers out there in the world, and you do want to send a transaction to the blockchain. So what do? So you initiate that transaction to the network, and the nodes in the network that are they collect those transactions, they put it in a block, and they're going to validate those transactions based on the rules of that network. And if those transactions are valid, then it actually goes to communicate, hey, I found a new block on the blockchain, and it communicates with all the participants in the network. The network comes to consensus, and then everybody in that network posts that block of information on its chain, and then goes to the next block. And what they're doing is they encrypt that piece of information and put that encryption in the next block. And then that next block is being encrypted as well and put in the next block. And that actually creates a chain of encrypted blocks of information to each other. So if you want to validate if something is correct in the chain, you only have to see the last chain. And if the whole sum adds up, you know, okay, this piece of information is correct. If something changes somewhere in the chain, the whole sum would not add up anymore because it's all linked within the next block, within the next block, within the next block. And this concept makes it immutable. And this is actually how blockchain works and why it has been so successful. For example, Bitcoin, it started on the internet. It's here to stay. It actually contains a lot of value at the moment. And that actually proves the power of this very simple concept. Next slide, please. But as I said, you can do this with money, but you can also do it with pieces of information. For example, between a supplier and a factory. Imagine a factory. It has a very complex supply chain. It orders a lot of stuff the whole day, very complex pricing structures, and it needs to keep track of that. So I'm not sure if you ever saw a purchasing department within a big company, but usually a lot of guys with big complex Excel sheets trying to figure out how they should buy on contract, off contract. They make sure that they got the right prices in place, and they have to distribute that from their purchase organization throughout all the business units, and it's a very complex system. So imagine putting everything on the blockchain, make it immutable, and make sure that everything, once it's been purchased, it goes on the blockchain. Everybody knows their price. You don't need to reconcile and do all this complex stuff. And you can do basically the same thing, put with information instead of that you would do as money. And that's actually how we look at blockchain and how we see it being used within companies for very different use cases throughout the world. So I hope, I think this was the last slide, Ronald, but I hope this small crash course gave you the idea of blockchain, why it is an important technology, and how you can use it for several use cases throughout the business space. So Ronald, I think that was the last slide. So back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Got too many stuff open. I will skip this one, as the handouts will contain some additional material on blockchain that we won't present tonight. So if you are interested, you can obtain the presentation at the end. Even so, the session is being taped not only for quality purposes, as they usually call it. Blockchain control frameworks. Why would you need them? And what are the most well-known types and forms? Now, first of all, as Koen mentioned, blockchain can resolve some of the supply chain issues and sometimes the lack of a middleman or a trusted party. However, on the other side, because we are not here to sell you the most new blockchain solution. There are also some risks there to address, and I won't go over all of them in detail, but you can imagine that usually they cross boundaries. So there are some issues regarding privacy and compliance. The legislation and the regulation differs from region and from country to country. There's a dependency on the blockchain protocol and the implementation of the protocol, as well as on the smart contracts that are providing the functionality. Misconfiguration and secure coding are critical areas to address. Under the hood of the blockchain, there's a key management solution. Back in the 90s and still today, I've spent quite some time on PKI and electronic signatures. This is also underneath the surface of the blockchain, most blockchain solutions. Other risks are, of course, in terms of the interfacing between the blockchain and ERP systems. So APIs are being used for connecting the two worlds. And the others are quite, I think, self-explanatory. There are, of course, also some generic access rights and security vulnerabilities. So the regular IT general controls are applicable also in the blockchain world. It's not immediately vanished. What to do with the different types of risks and how to address them. Here I included a number of sample controls for addressing the risks that we discussed on the previous slide. However, you can detail all risks and all controls, but it will be a major undertaking, and potentially you will miss some areas or miss some risks by working in an incoherent manner. So that's the reason for developing blockchain frameworks. So why would you to develop or apply a framework? And I think I won't read them all out loud, but of course you've got immediately all the areas in a structured way with good practices included. It can be part of your plan to check act cycle around a blockchain implementation. And a critical one is also interoperability. You're not alone in applying a blockchain. It's usually, of course, or within a multinational or with a number of other organizations and companies. And last, but certainly not least, it can also help you to see whether or not they comply with the key criteria. On the other hand, there are some disadvantages of such a framework. It can be quite extensive because everyone would like to see his or her risks and controls included. So it can be a bit overloaded. And if you need to implement a complete framework, well, you're still piloting or just performing a proof of concept, that it could be a bit overdone. Other areas that are not covered is what's quite crucial is, of course, which data is being entered on to the blockchain. So the data integrity part is still there. So you need validation controls, which are usually not included in most of the frameworks. And of course, some soft controls. How is everyone using the blockchain, and how is being connected to other systems, and how are they being used? So you need to consider the entire data chain, even beyond the blockchain. And of course, not all questions can be addressed in a framework. So very specific questions, how to deal with selecting the right protocols, and how to do secure coding, or the integration part, that's not always included in such a framework. A framework sometimes has multiple contents, that it's kind of an word that's being multi-interpretable, as there are frameworks for the blockchain protocol, and there are frameworks for controls, security, auditing, etc. So here are, for instance, a number of frameworks, or better, protocols that are being applied for blockchain projects. But in some instances, they are also being named blockchain frameworks. So that's causing a lot of misunderstanding about what blockchain frameworks are really entail. And as you can see, there are different types of protocols, and being mentioned by Koen. Some are for one industry sector. They're close to more private or permissioned. So there are different types that you can use, and I think that everyone has probably heard of the Hyperledger and the Corda. That there are two quite well-known protocols that are being used. I'm not going to spend the rest of the hour on this slide, so I would like to move on to the blockchain control frameworks. There are a few, and there are multiple that are coming up, and of course we are here in ISACA Square Table, so and with organized in association with Maria. So of course I needed to mention those two. And the ISO, which is a very powerful organization, also embarked on a blockchain standardization project, which Siddharth will discuss later on. However, these are not all of them, because, and I'm not sure if that's easy readable on your end, but as you can see, there are quite a number of them, and they all have different angles. As you can see, some are the most are of course quite recent. They're between 2018 and 2000 and next year and the year after. So even while blockchain is around for already 10 years, the frameworks are all quite recent. Some are US led, some are even from Malta, Others are more from an industry association. And up till now, they're all in English, at least the ones that are mentioned here. There's of course a Dutch one coming up, the Maria version. And as you can see, the nature of the frameworks is different. ISACA has even two of them. One is focused on auditing, the other one is focused on controls and security. Governance is sometimes included. Some are primarily focused on security. And as you can see, not all address the same subjects. You can see that some are just addressing the entire stack, from all the way from the infrastructure to the smart contracts, to the business processes, to the governance. While others are more or less more focused, like the one from Malta, on a few key items, and some are more focused on cryptocurrencies, which is of course a specific implementation of blockchain. And what we also noticed during the Norea project work is that the data integrity part is missing to a large extent. Some are just very COSO focused, or more IT general controls focused, and they're all at their own specific angles. However, data integrity is only mentioned very limited, and also some of the interfacing aspects are addressed, almost minimal. Well, that are crucial areas for a proper and then reliable implementation within an organization or within a complete supply chain. We'll focus on the next one, where we focus a bit more in detail on Norea. As you can see, there we will address the governance aspects, the business processes, also the financial and economic objectives that the blockchain is about to achieve, and the IT and information flows. And as you can see on the right-hand side, these are the subjects that will be addressed in a control framework, which is well known, I think, in terms of which aspects are mentioned in the columns. The Norea framework also specifically focuses on use cases. So we'll have use cases from the Port of Rotterdam, from the Dutch government in terms of the tax office, the things like the mobility as a service, this is the blockchain implementation at the CIB, which is a very specific one, which is hard to translate right now. And we'll also spend some time on the relationship between the blockchain and things like the financial audit, because when financial auditors or IT auditors encounter a blockchain implementation, they also need to do what to address in such a situation. Before moving on to the ISO standard, there are only very limited maturity models. So I included the maturity model that we have developed for blockchain application. And as mentioned, you will receive the handout, so I won't go through all the areas and all the maturity levels again. Here they are listed, but that takes a bit too long for now. But at least you can imagine that for a proof of concept, you don't need to immediately jump to the highest maturity level. That there are possibilities to take intermediate steps before rolling out in a broader project for an entire supply chain. This is where I would like to round up the discussion about control frameworks, and like to hand over to Siddharth regarding the ISO standard.
Many thanks, Ronald, Koen. So probably just a brief introduction in terms of the work which is happening in the space. So within ISO, there's a committee which is known as TC307, which is related to blockchain and distributed ledger technologies, which is focusing on the governance, use cases, interoperability, the security of smart contracts, as well as guidelines for auditing DLT systems. That's the committee which is actually drafting these standards. The local standardization body in Netherlands, which is actually coordinating on behalf of ISO, is NEN. And if anyone would like to participate in the ISO forum for this particular piece of work, they're most welcome to get in touch with the local body, which is NEN, which is the National Standards Body of Netherlands. Probably moving on to the second slide, please, Ronald. So some of the work which has been happening and some of the piece of work which has already been published by ISO is a part on ontology. The second one is particularly around use cases, and the third one is around the security and governance. So these are some of the published standards and upcoming ones, which you can probably refer or buy as well on the ISO portal. Probably moving on. As I just mentioned, some of the broad sections or standards which are being developed as part of this particular committee, which would be coming out over a period of time between 2021 to 2023, are related to the smart contract security, security of digital assets and custodians, governance, interoperability, as well as the specific topic which I'm going to cover today, which is on the guidelines for auditing DLT standards, DLT systems, sorry. The next slide, please, Ronald. Probably we can just jump this one as well. Specifically, before I jump into the work which is being done at ISO as a part of the guidelines for auditing DLT-based systems, I think some of the frameworks, the global frameworks and standards have already been covered by Ronald in the previous slides. There's one that I would probably like to refer to. This is the work which has been done by ITUT, specifically in terms of the focus areas for DLT audit. So some of the broad areas that the particular document covers or the forum is currently focusing on is audit of the off-chain components, transactions, auditing transactions based on DLT-based systems, providing assurance of the DLT technologies, security and environmental controls. So these are some of the sectional controls or domain-based controls which are common to different frameworks which have already been covered by Ronald in the previous frameworks. But these are the common areas which are common across many of these global frameworks that we have seen. Some of the broad areas that if you were to go perform a deep dive into this particular document, the source is particularly mentioned here in terms of what this particular document is covering. It mostly focuses on one, whether there is a direct technology, if there is any direct technology risk which is involved in terms of the key properties, the use of cryptographic techniques, use of technologies and solutions, for example, around devices, granting or revoking access, specifically with respect to governance of consortiums. How do you go about determining or governing the consensus mechanism, the nodes, onboarding and offboarding of nodes, design and approval of smart contracts, and overall security of the network. These are some of the key areas that the ITUT framework has been focusing on. Probably jumping on to what the ISO document that I'm currently helping build is focusing on. So this particular sectional document that we're currently working on builds on the existing body of work from ISO, similar to ISO 27001, the control sets around auditing DLT-based systems, cloud-based systems and others. So this particular document covers areas like internal audit, external audit, as well as third-party audits, audit of vendors and fourth parties who may be a party to your DLT system. So some of the focus areas that this will be focusing on the pre-implementation risk, primarily around suitability of the DLT platform for the selected use case, the broad-based architecture, architecture review, etc. Then it focuses on the implementation and development cycle, primarily building on some of the topics which have already been discussed so often, which is security by design, vulnerability, the source code review, security of weak endpoints, key ownership and management. So given that the plethora of new DLT systems which are coming up and the various types of consensus mechanisms which have been coming up, so the frameworks as well as the control sets are always catching up, specifically with respect to the work which is already being done in the technology space. So we are always trying to catch up, but we're trying to keep it a little bit generic in terms of or trying to cover the most popular sets of consensus mechanisms here instead of trying to cover the entire universe. And this would be a living document as more and more different type of protocols as well as consensus mechanisms come into play. So key ownership, which is primarily focusing on the secure storage, maintenance, review and governance of the cryptographic private keys, which are used for authentication and validation of the nodes. Interoperability. Now, this is a topic which is a little bit close to my heart, specifically because if you see the vast array of platforms that even Ronald referred to some time back, specifically with the advent of CBDCs, for example, central bank digital currencies, as well as smart contracts, which should be based on a settlement of some of these digital payments or digital assets, which is coming up in the financial services space. Many of the countries, for example, Bank in Sweden, or for that matter, the Central Bank of Thailand, they came out with the CBDCs which are based on Corda. Then you have the digital yuan in China, which is totally based on a separate platform. So how do you govern the interoperability of some of these platforms? Or if you were to wear your auditing hat, how do you look at the proof of ownership? How do you ensure that the smart contracts will get executed across the board, whether they're interoperable or not, and how do you integrate it with your enterprise applications? That's more on the governance side, which there's a separate team within the ISO TC 3017 which is focusing on. But this particular document will focus more on the auditability of such systems. So consistent communication between multiple blockchain platforms, integration with the enterprise and legacy systems would be a key focus area for this particular section. Then you have the focus on the consensus mechanism. Blocks in the chain are validated by nodes. How do you keep it from adversaries taking over? How do you keep the independence of the board or the governing committee of the blockchain consortium? How are they controlling the consensus mechanism? Different aspects of it. Heterogeneous regulatory compliance. Given that many of these consortiums or large organizations which are implementing these platforms and solutions cut across more than 20, 30 odd countries, how do you ensure that the baseline configurations, the baseline security requirements of different regulators are met, both from a smart contract perspective, from a privacy perspective, or for that matter, from a resiliency perspective as well. Access and permissions management, pretty standard. I'll probably not spend too much time on that. But again, one of the most important aspects of any system, which continues to be a focus area here as well. Ronald, if you can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Infrastructure and application management. So primarily, this is again something which has been common to many a framework, but again, an important aspect, focusing on the security of best practices around development, testing of the blockchain applications, platform, infrastructure, and communication interfaces with external networks, external parties. What we have seen is the DLT systems alone are don't stay in isolation, right? So specifically integration with payment systems in future, like be it a SWIFT or others, how does the integration happen? Dispute resolution remains a critical area for that. That's probably covered in the transactions part, but I just jumped the queue there. Network and node governance, focusing on monitoring of the network, for information compliance, node reputation checks to handle and resolve any disputes. Smart contracts. And there have been multiple issues with version control of platforms. Specifically, it has been found that smart contracts which were built in earlier versions of Ethereum had many a security flaw, which recently came up in a paper from the National University of Singapore. So whether you're using the right version, the right patches, how is the smart contract being encoded, whether the latest encryption standards are being supported for the smart contract, whether the right execution logic has been built in, and whether this is not in violation of any federal laws. Network and vulnerability management. This is more of the monitoring for network vulnerabilities, attacks. How do you integrate it with your security operations center, SIM tools? How do you monitor the network primarily which is supporting your DLT system? Endpoint security, vendor due diligence. So there are so many different consortiums which are coming up, but you don't want any consortium members to hijack or probably take over your network. So specifically, due diligence is one of the key aspects for vendors who are helping you or supporting you in setting up your private blockchain initiatives or consortiums. I did touch upon the resiliency bit. So business continuity and disaster recovery, these again still remain to be focus areas for critical national infrastructure which would be put up on DLT systems. And again, touching back upon the transactions bit, specifically validating transactions, monitoring should be in place for the transactions which are going through your network, as well as a dispute resolution mechanism. And how do all of these come together? I think these are some of the broad areas that the particular document that we're currently working on for developing the guidelines for auditing DLT-based platforms. There are other initiatives within the ISO part, specifically focusing on governance, interoperability, as well as security and design of digital assets, as well as of custodians, followed by vulnerabilities and risk management, as well as a broad case for use cases. But that was just a gist in terms of the work which is happening at ISO, specifically on this particular topic. Over to you, Ronald.
Yeah, I think that's me then.
Koen, yeah, yes, please.
Yeah. So let me share the screen, and I hope everybody can see it. So please let me know if you cannot see it. So as I said before, blockchain, the first use case was basically money, but of course there are now multiple use cases that have been built on blockchain, and many use cases involve sharing data via the blockchain, using the immutability characteristics of the blockchain and the decentralized character that it has. And the idea that we have, and also with our application, is that once you have built a system where you want to share data with participants, the whole power of that system is to connect that system to as many participants as you can to increase the power of that network. And what you want to do then is you want to control the blockchain using your ERP system. So, for example, if you think about the rebate use case that I shared before, doing your purchase orders via the blockchain, and then your supplier receives that order via the blockchain as a sales order. You want to actually be able to do an MRP run within your system, create all the purchase orders that you need, and send that out via the blockchain. So what we created is a piece of middleware to connect the blockchain with an ERP system. And what we have done is we created standard connectors for example, SAP and the Microsoft Dynamics platform. And in our application, you can build the integrations from the blockchain to the ERP system, and from the ERP system to the blockchain. You can monitor these integration. There's an error log and several standards you can enter. And this system this tool can be used by you, but the power of it is, of course, to also share that throughout the network so that everybody can automatically share data and receive data from the blockchain. So currently, we have done this for SAP and Microsoft, and we're trying to extend that to several other ERP systems. And we have now connected Hyperledger, Fabric, and Ethereum, and we are going to extend to multi-chain and Corda on a later space. So let's dive into the application so that you get an idea how you can integrate a blockchain with the ERP system. So if we go into the dashboard, we actually see that the middleware is active. We show the active integrations on the dashboard. There's an activity log with the connection, the things that are happened. So as I see, the token is almost expired, so that will be regenerated once again. So you need to have an access token, and we have this transaction log, and you see that we, in this demo we fire a lot of purchase orders. So if we go into the integration builder, you see we have a lot of integrations here. Here you can add a new integration, and it's very easily to, once the middleware is in place, to connect a new integration at your ERP system. So how does this work? So for example, you can see this is a purchase order. It goes from an SAP S/4HANA system to a Hyperledger Fabric blockchain network. I cannot scroll down too much since this session has been recorded and we actually have to fill out the credentials here. But you get the ID. You enter the fields that you want to send from the SAP system to the blockchain. You can see the mapping here. We can add some custom values that we want to give to the blockchain, or we want to change a value that's possible, and then we can set the credentials, we can test the connection, and then we actually activate the integration. So here in the settings menu, you can do the WebSocket settings, the endpoint setting, the database settings, and the notification. So for example, if something goes wrong, you get an email or any other alerts that you wish. And we have a whole activity log where you can see all the actions that are taking place on the blockchain. So that is actually how we integrate a blockchain with an ERP system, and we've now been working together with several initiatives to see, okay, how can we help them speed up the onboarding process of their blockchain network. So I think back to you, Ronald. So I try to keep it a little bit short, then that there's some room for questions left.
Maybe you can respond to the first question that's coming in.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I was in presentation mode. Can you read it out, Let
me see if I can.
For electronic identity. Yes, blockchain can definitely be used for electronic identity. So you see already several use cases. I believe the government of Estland is already experimenting with that. So the whole idea is here, of course, to create a database, a distributed database that's immutable. In a country where people can store their identity records, and they have their own basically private key to access that information, so they can on their behalf prove that they have that identity by connecting with their private keys to a network. Totally different use case basically than an enterprise blockchain, but that's possible.
And probably just to add on to that, what Koen mentioned, there are multiple initiatives in terms of digital passports, as well as live examples of countries actually implementing digital identities based on DLT. So the answer would be a firm yes.
Yeah, and also the Dutch government is doing a pilot project on sovereign identities in conjunction with the Canadian government. Is the slide still visible or visible again?
There is one more
Yes.
question in the chat, Ronald. Are
Okay.
there solutions for healthcare environments?
Yes, so I've heard about the use case that's regarding the implants or prothesis. I'm not sure if I say it correctly in English, but that if people get that something in their bodies, they register that in the blockchain, and then all the medical staff around the world can actually enter the blockchain to see which type of prothesis or medical device is in the body of that patient. So to quickly share information throughout the world. Also, again, when the owner of that data, so the patient gives that access to that blockchain.
And probably just to give you one more example, the digital health passports, specifically with COVID as well as with vaccinations which are coming in. So I think all of your health information as well as your vaccination information would very soon be brought up on a digital health card, which would actually be linked to your passports, your visas whenever you want to travel outside your country. That's again a very prime example of where healthcare information is being secured and put up on DLT.
Yes, the Dutch blockchain coalition is also experimenting around a vaccine passport on the blockchain. To be cautious of the time, it's 7 minutes before the hour. We can discuss one or two case studies, but we can also spend time on any questions that you might have regarding blockchain. Or otherwise, we'll discuss maybe this case study regarding e-voting, which is quite crucial now in COVID times.
There are two more questions coming in, Ronald. One of them is from Martin saying, but wouldn't putting identities into an immutable ledger contradicting with the right to be forgotten? With other words, you cannot put other personal data in, can you? Question mark.
That's an interesting one. There's an intense debate about, of course, privacy versus immutability of the blockchain. There are solutions to that developed, and the right to be forgotten is not. How should I mention it? Yeah, to phrase it, it's not exclusive in terms of that. You cannot be entirely removed from the identity registration in the Netherlands, for instance, or in any other country. So the right to be forgotten has some regulatory limits as well, but there have been solutions in terms of how to remove certain data from the blockchain.
Okay, thanks. And one more question, maybe Koen, you can answer this one. Is the integration to a SAP-based, SAP-based solution?
Yes, I can answer that. The solution is developed in Node.js, and the front end that you just saw is an Angular front end. So, but I think you were very sharp to see that it's hosted on the SAP Cloud Platform, but it's not an SAP-based solution. It's developed by KPMG itself, and it can be deployed on any hyperscaler as you wish. But it does have all the pre-configured connectors to the relevant SAP transactions built in already.
Okay, thanks for answering. Maybe time for the case study, Ronald.
Yeah, Siddharth, would you like to address this one?
Sure. So specifically, this is something in light of the SRD2 guidelines, which is the shareholding rights directive 2, which came into effect in in August of 2020 in Europe across 9 odd countries. Specifically, it talks about the rights of minority stakeholders, knowing the end beneficiaries who hold the equity rights or upwards of 3% or 4% in a large listed organization. Because typically, if you see in Europe, there was a concept of passporting where fund managers from across the globe could actually invest, and the listed firms never knew who was actually holding the beneficiaries, who were the end beneficiaries of the equity. So specifically keeping that in mind, we developed a solution which can be used for one, knowing the end users as well as supporting voting in terms of virtual AGMs for corporate actions, etc. So, and this is something which caters to issuers, scrutinizers, proxy advisors, regulators, and shareholders. If you typically look at the overall price points for which proxy voting occurs, you typically vote via a website, or you actually authorize your bank or somebody to vote on your behalf. It's quite expensive, with at times the proxy vote costing anywhere between 50 to 10, 50 to up to upwards up to 100 euros as well. So in order to bring down the cost as well as to have more people participate in a safe and secure manner, this is something that we built in terms of a DLT based, a hyperledger based DLT voting system, which is actually interoperable across different platforms, so that if people were voting or an organization is listed on multiple exchanges, you can actually have the smart contracts or voting to be done across multiple DLT platforms, as well as any corporate actions, for example, dividend warrants or anything else being corporate actions being executed on the fly via smart contracts across different platforms. It also supports virtual AV, audio video, for virtual AGMs. Probably if you want to just jump onto the next slide, please, Ronald. So this is primarily in terms of the broad features. I'll probably not jump into that. Typically scalable, interoperable. It can work as a utility model, so it can bring down the overall cost. So we're just focusing on some of the key aspects of blockchain in terms of one, how it can be implemented, as well as its transparency from a corporate governance perspective, and all of that. Probably jumping on to the next one. Functionalities, it's an interoperable, e-voting of services, reporting, reconciliation. So typically what we are seeing, why we put up this particular example was just to showcase how DLT can actually help you in bringing down the overall cost of operations for something which is very expensive, and it can actually be used in a federated model to bring down the overall cost. Thanks, Ronald.
Okay, I think we're almost at the hour. So the handouts will be shared. And any questions can be raised now or can be sent afterwards. We included a number of the interesting articles and further case studies on this slide, so you can take another look and a more in-depth look if you're interested to learn more about certain areas, or if you like to spend a little bit more time with Koen on how your ERP systems and blockchain can really interact. So with that, I would like to hand over back to Manon to close off the session, and thank you all for your attention.
Yeah, thanks Ronald, Koen and Siddharth. Thanks a lot for this interesting presentation. And thank all participants for being here tonight. The next presentation will be on April 14th, so next week, on why privileged access is CISO's first priority. So I'll enjoy your evening and hope to see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.